Hello there Scapers, my name is Xenobilius and welcome to my Hexhunter bow analysis video. So I was actually debating whether or not to make this video because they have actually suggested that they will be making some changes to the way the Hexhunter bow works, but I decided to make this video nevertheless. So in case they do bring out some changes, please do check the description. That will be the first place I will be updating you guys with the changes they make, and I'll probably make another video, but let's get right into it. I must confess I'm so excited to be showing you guys all the stats I've uncovered doing tons and tons of calculations over the last 2 or 3 days. So sit back, relax, and hopefully you'll enjoy this show. So let's start at the basic level. How do you actually get this bow? This bow is dropped by level 99 Slayer monsters, the Soul Gazers, which were released last Monday. And the bow itself is a tier 80 bow, worth about 220 mil. That's about what I got it for. I had to insta buy it because I couldn't buy it for any less. But that was 2 days ago. So I don't know what the price is right now, but the bow does have two special effects which make it useful. The first one is that it gives a plus 10% damage boost to enemies that use magic, specifically enemies that are capable of dropping the magic golden rock. So that doesn't include all magical enemies, but it does include a lot of them. I'm going to denote that in my calculations with the symbol on the right. The second one is that it gives you an accuracy bonus, specifically an invisible affinity bonus, to monsters that are weak to arrows. They do not necessarily have to use magic, but they have to be weak to arrows. And I'll denote this with the following symbol. The second one is actually very negligible. I'll talk about it when you get to see me test it at the different bosses and Slayer monsters that are weak to arrows, but rest assured it is practically useless. By far the most important aspect of this bow is its first ability. What are the monsters that it actually works on? Well, here is a list. It's not exhaustive by any means, but on the top row you can see all the boss monsters that the 10% damage bonus of this bow's special effect works on. And there are a few question marks, such as Magister. I'm not sure whether it works on Magister, but it definitely doesn't work on Nex, which would have been very useful. On the bottom there is a non-exhaustive list of Slayer monsters it works on, which use magic. Again, there are a lot more Slayer monsters that use magic, but these are just some examples. As for the second effect, the accuracy bonus to enemies that are weak to arrows, well, there are only two bosses that are actually weak to arrows as such. KK's Mage Phase and Daemonheim Prime. This effect is actually very useless, so all the monsters in this particular screen are already, you're probably already going to have 100% accuracy on them, so it doesn't really matter. And the bottom you can see some Slayer monsters that are weak to arrows. Now there are a number of comparisons you could be making. You could compare the Hexhunter bow to every single other bow that is above it in terms of tier. So you have tier 85 Wyvern Crossbow, Deathloader's Darts, and so on. Tier 87 we have Obliteration. Tier 88 we have the Superior Morrigan's Axe, and so on. Tier 90 we have the Noxious Bow and Ascensions. 92 we have the Saren God Bow. We could also look at the others within its own class, within its own tier of damage, tier 80. And with the special effect, obviously the Hexhunter is the best item at tier 80, assuming you're fighting a monster which has a special effect applicable to it. And finally we have the comparison between the two that most people probably want it to be compared to, and that's what I'm going to do in this video. This is going to form the crux of the video, comparing the Hexhunter bow with the other two bows, if you like, the other two main bows that are competition for it, with the respective current prices at the bottom. I'm actually going to be using tier 80 as a base to compare everything else with, so I'm going to compare the plus 10% versus the tier 80, and I'm going to compare Noxious and Saren God Bow with the tier 80 to see the damage and accuracy differences. So firstly, let's start off at the most basic level, comparing these three items against tier 80. Assuming you have 99 ranged, Supreme Overloads, and you are using tier 95 cursors, this is what happens. So as you can see, the stats are along expected lines, if you like, except for one major point of concern. The Hexhunter bow with its special effect, which I'm going to say is the Mage Hexhunter bow if you like, is better than the Noxious Longbow in terms of damage. But overall, because the Noxious Axios longbow has way better accuracy than a tier 80 bow. It's 10 levels higher. The overall DPS difference is 22.81%, far greater than the Mage Hexhunter bow's 10%. And the same can be said about the Seren God bow. However, if you look at damage, you can see that the Mage Hexhunter bow is better than the Nox longbow, and it's only very slightly worse than the Seren God bow. Very slightly. And that's reflected in the percentages. 10% for the damage of the Mage Hexhunter versus 10.59% for the damage of the Seren Godbow. What can we do to change this? Well, if you apply a bunch of ability damage bonuses such as jewelry and power armor, along with potentially tier 99 prayers and the reckless aura, if you would like, not necessary, you can make it so that the Mage Hexhunter bow has a higher damage rating than the Seren Godbow. That is why we are even doing this video. The fact that this is possible, the fact that this will influence DPS overall, is why we're doing this analysis. So what does this mean? It means that now, with the same comparison, just adding the best in slot items that were shown previously, you can get plus 235 ability damage. When you plug this into the equations and turn the cogs of the mathematical machinery, if you like, the Mage Hexhunter bow is now best in slot for damage, and the Seren Godbow falls behind to second place. Again, the problem here is accuracy. Tier 80 bows do not have a very good accuracy, and assuming you're fighting a monster where you will not even get 100% accuracy with the Seren Godbow, there's no way you're going to do anywhere near as much DPS being the combined effect of accuracy and damage. You will do nowhere near as much DPS as a tier 90 or a tier 92, and the numbers actually drop a little bit because of the effect of the ability damage bonuses, but again, that's very small. The Seren Godbow is still 25.8% more DPS than a tier 80 weapon. The Mage Hexhunter is only 10% more DPS than a tier 80 weapon. If you want to add the effect of tier 99 curses, if you had enough money to splash out for the Desolation curse, what is it, 560 mil or something right now? I don't know. Well, that's not going to do you too much good. The best damage rating is still with the Mage Hexhunter bow, but your accuracy ain't going to improve anywhere near enough. However, it has dropped even further from 25.81 to 25.41. But overall, I would say that the effect of tier 99 curses to bridge this gap is very small. Obviously, the effect of tier 99 curses is huge in terms of DPS, but if we're just comparing the two, it doesn't really bridge the gap as such. So in summary, there are three situations we could have a look at. The first is when the hit chances never reach 100. That's what we just looked at. And in that case, the DPS of the Mage Hexhunter will always be less than the Seren Godbow. The Seren Godbow being the best in slot DPS item. Number two is when the hit chance of the best in slot item reaches 100%, i.e. the Seren Godbow. When the Seren Godbow reaches 100% hit chance on whatever monster you're fighting, that's when you can start to manipulate the hit chance of the Mage Hexhunter to get it closer and closer to 100%. And in the third case, when you're fighting a monster which has such low defense, or you're using so many accuracy boosts that your hit chance is 100% even with a tier 80 weapon, that is when you've hit the sweet spot, you've hit the lottery. That's when the Mage Hexhunter bow is the best in slot item. So the goal is to get it to that point. The goal is to go from 1 to 3. And to do that, you need to improve your hit chance. So there are a number of things that will improve your hit chance, such as accuracy, affinity, and the defense of the monster you're fighting. There are loads of different things that can actually affect this. I've shown you some of them on screen now. You can see that the range Hexhunter bow, which is the second effect I talked about, will work on monsters that are weak to arrows, but there are loads of other things, such as your curses that you're using, overloads, what your range level is, what affinity boosts you're using, like Statius Warhammer and so on, and things like that. So you can use all of those to your advantage. And if you do use them to your advantage, you can get the hit chances of the Mage Hexhunter to match the hit chance of the Seren Godbow. By match, I mean 100. You can't go above 100. So you can exploit the laws of physics, guys, to get the hit chances to be 100 for both of them. And that's the way you get the Mage Hexhunter to be the best in slot ranged item against monsters that are affected by it. So let's work our way from 1 to 3, starting with the Mage Hexhunter being completely useless and trying to get it to be better than the Seren Godbow. In the first case, we have the following. So without any miscellaneous ability damage bonuses apart from your weapon, ammo, overloads, range level, and curses, we have the following stats. Just a summary from what I showed you before. Now, if you factor these in to some quick calculations, you can see that because my Mage Hexhunter damage is lower than the Seren Godbow damage, 1975 versus 1985, it's going to be impossible for me to actually get their DPS to match up. This is why. So if we assume that we're in a situation where the Seren Godbow just about reaches 100% hit chance, alright? By extension, the Hexhunter, being a tier 80 weapon, will have a hit chance of 86.41% in this particular situation. Now, if we say that DPS conceptually, without actually focusing on actual DPS, conceptually DPS is damage times hit chance. And we have a number to compare the two bows with. We want to try and match up the DPS of the Mage Hexhunter with the DPS of the Seren Godbow. The minimum hit chance we need to get for the Mage Hexhunter to match the Seren Godbow is 100.53. Essentially, that's impossible because you can't go above 100. So in this case, nope, no chance of the Hexhunter being the best in slot item. However, if you add ability damage bonuses, and this is why it's so important for you to have jewelry or power armor and things that will improve your ability damage bonuses. If you add those in, then this becomes much more realistic. So now, in order for the DPS to match up, you need to get your Mage Hexhunter's hit chance on whatever monster you're fighting to be 98.82%. This is a magic number. If you get it to 98.82%, then you will have at least as much DPS as a Seren Godbow. If you get it to 100, great, you'll have even more. You can't go above 100, but you have that little bit to work with. And what do you need? You need to add 12.42% hit chance from your 86% to get you to this point. How do you do that? You do that by using the stuff I talked about. So a Nihil will add 5% of 86. A Reaper Necklace will add a flat 3%. What else is there? Accuracy Aura will add 10% of 86. Berserker Auras will add even more, as I talked about in my previous comparison video if you want to check that out. So by doing this, by manipulating the hit chances, we can get the Mage Hexhunter to be the best in slot item. Now, just for the sake of completeness, I'm including the effect of T99 curses if you do decide to use them and you have them. They're going to change it up a very small amount. You're only going to have to add 12.14% to your hit chance, and you require only 98.80%, not 98.82%, guys. So congrats on saving that 0.02%. But essentially my point is that tier 99 curses don't help you a great deal in bridging the gap. I'm just reiterating what I talked about earlier. I'm not saying they're useless. Of course they're not. They're really good. You should get them for overall DPS. But in terms of improving your hit chance, not so much. And last but not least, if we just look at the previous case, but with the Noxious bow instead, you can see that you don't need to do as much to get the DPSs to match up, because the Noxes are tier 90 and the SGBs are tier 92. So you only need to get your hit chance up to 97.51%, which basically means you need to add 8.9% to your existing hit chance, which is actually very easy. You can do that immediately with a Supreme Accuracy Aura without anything else. Remember, this is all without actually looking at any specific bosses so far. Right, let's pull it all together one last time. So, just to recap, we had 3 scenarios to consider. The first scenario was when hit chances never reached 100. This was the worst case scenario for the Mage Hexhunter, because the gulf between the Mage Hexhunter and the Seren Godbow was vast. So the Mage Hexhunter was 10% better than an equivalent tier 80, but the Seren Godbow was 25.81% better DPS, so no chance whatsoever. In the second case, when the Seren Godbow just about got to 100% hit chance, we could start to manipulate the hit chance of the Mage Hexhunter such that it got closer and closer to 100% hit chance. In fact, it didn't need to get to 100% hit chance, it only needed to get to 98.82% hit chance to have the same DPS output as a Seren Godbow, and only 97.51 to get to the same levels of DPS as a Nox bow, or equivalently Ascensions. Therefore, you only needed to increase your existing current DPS using the current setup by 12.42% to match up with the Seren and 8.9% to match up with the tier 90. These were really feasible, to be honest. Nothing too extravagant. You could use Nihil, Reaper Necklace, and perhaps an Accuracy Aura as well. And if you really needed to, you could also use the Berserker Auras to help you out. And number 3 is the case when now the Mage Hexhunter is the best in slot item. And when does it become a best in slot item? It becomes a best in slot item when you reach 100% hit chance for for everything. For example, when you're doing Slayer, or for example when you're fighting a boss where you've got all your hit chances up to 100% even with a tier 80 accuracy. And in this case, their Mage Hexhunter is 2.56% more DPS than a tier 90 and 1.19% more DPS than a tier 92. Another way to put it is that the Mage Hexhunter is tier 93.8, basically a tier 94 weapon in this third and final scenario. Remember that all this only applies when you're attacking a monster that is affected by this special effect of the Hexhunter bow. None of this matters if it doesn't. I really did want to include my testing at different bosses in this video as well, but it's already pretty long, so I'm going to leave that to a different video, so look forward to that. But the point is that pretty much everything can be calculated before you even go and test this out. And in fact, testing doesn't reveal a great deal except for practical aspects of the Hexhunter at different bosses. Most of it is in the calculation, and so I'm going to conclude with a few points you might want to take away. The first point obviously is that the Hexhunter bow is only useful at eligible monsters, specifically at monsters that use magic and are able to drop magic rocks. I talked about this earlier, there is a list, and only those monsters are affected. If this is the case, we have three options. The first option is when your monster is so tanky that even with your best in slot item currently, which may be the Seren Godbow or the Noxious Longbow or Ascensions, your hit chance will never reach 100%. If that's the case, then the Hexhunter is even worse than what your best in slot item is, and therefore it's pretty useless. It's a way worse DPS than your best in slot item could ever be. The second option is when your best in slot item just about has 100% hit chance against whatever you're fighting. You can get your Hexhunter's DPS to match your best in slot item's DPS if your Hexhunter's hit chance is boosted to 98.8%. If you get it to 98.8%, your Hexhunter will just about become better DPS than your Seren Godbow. If you have a tier 90 instead, you only need to get it to 97.5%. I say only, but that's still pretty high. And you can do this using a number of different accuracy boosts which I've mentioned so far. Now the third case, which is probably when you're fighting a boss like Legions or Dagonoth Prime, where your hit chance is always 100% even with a tier 80, then your Hexhunter bow is now best in slot by 1.19% more DPS than the Seren Godbow, or 2.56% more DPS than a tier 90 ranged weapon. That is pretty extraordinary, and I think that's the main takeaway from this video. Hexhunter is not completely useless. It is actually a pretty good bow, but the use cases for this bow and the amount of things you need to do to get it to that point is pretty ridiculous for how much it costs and how rare it is. So that's where I think any buffs in the future will be beneficial for the bow to make it more popular amongst everyone, not just people killing a certain boss or people just doing Slayer. And even when you're doing Slayer, it only affects magical Slayer monsters. The second main point I want you to take away is that ignore the arrow weak effect of the Hexhunter bow. It is literally pointless. I have no idea why they've included it. It is so pointless that I'm pretty sure they're trolling us by including it, but whatever. The third point is that, and this is probably the most important point, the more ability damage and accuracy bonuses you gather, the better and better the Hexhunter bow performs compared to tier 90 and tier 92. In fact, the Hexhunter bow cannot be better than the best in slot items unless you have some sort of ability damage boost, even like 50. The best possible is 235 using the items shown on screen right now. You don't need 235, you only need like 50, 60, 70, something like that to get to the point where the Hexhunter begins to have the same damage output as the Seren Godbow, assuming 100% hit chance. And how do you get 100% hit chance? You get it by using the following items, which is not an exhaustive list, but it is a list nevertheless. So that's all I have for this video. Hope you enjoyed it and took something away from it. Look forward to part 2 where I'll be talking about different bosses in Slayer and how the Hex performs there. Most of the calculation for that has already been done, but I'll be talking more about the practical aspects and a few more little calculations based on a few tweaks here and there. For example, you wouldn't use a Nihil to do Yakamaru. Well, you might do, I don't know. But more realistic applications of the calculations I've done so far. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to shout out, because I know that it's been a lot to take in, and I will be more than happy to answer any questions you have. Some of the more popular questions I've been asked were about perks and stuff like the Slayer helmet boost and things like that. The fact is, those two things affect everything equally. So when we're looking at differences, it doesn't matter. Things like the Reckless Aura and T99 Prayers, however, do not affect everything equally. They vary depending on other things, so their effect will affect the difference, but the effect of stuff like the Slayer helmet, the corruption effect in the Sophonim Slayer dungeon, perks and so on will not affect the difference when we're comparing things. Really, it comes down to linear versus non-linear relationships, but that's getting a bit too technical. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.